Midnight Files.
The thunder had begun to roar across the sky, as if a series of violent explosions were ripping through the heavens. In the midst of that deafening rumble, blinding flashes of lightning tore through the dark veil of night, illuminating the pitch-black shadows for just a few fleeting seconds before plunging the world back into darkness. In those brief electric moments of light, the sweeping valleys flanking both sides of the road flickered into view-dense, suffocating forests on either side, their ancient trees swaying violently under the wrath of the storm's howling winds. Suddenly, a hand clamped down onto his shoulder. Ethan jolted, his heart leaping into his throat as he turned sharply. It was just Ryan, his best friend, who was sitting right next to him in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel tightly as he pushed the car faster through the tempest. Noticing the raw terror frozen in Ethan's eyes, Ryan offered a faint, tense smile, turned his gaze back to the dark highway stretching ahead, and asked his friend why he was flinching so easily, mocking him for acting as if he had just seen a ghost. Ryan's words felt distant, barely registering in Ethan's ears, as if his mind couldn't process the sound. For the next 2 minutes, a heavy, suffocating silence filled the cabin of the speeding car. Sensing Ethan's deep unease, Ryan's expression grew solemn. With his left hand firmly on the wheel, his right fingers held a lit cigarette. A thin trail of gray smoke drifted upwards as Ryan took a long, deep drag, exhaling the thick smoke out of the cracked side window into the rainy night. Ethan wasn't scared of the hand on his shoulder. The real terror was locked inside his own mind. Behind his eyes, a horrific reel of events was replaying like a grotesque slideshow, vivid, terrifying pictures of everything that had happened to them up until this very moment. Meanwhile, the fog outside was thickening, and heavy raindrops slammed against the glass. Ryan reached out and flipped the automatic window wipers. The blades scraped across the windshield, clearing the blurred vision. Now, the view ahead was sharper. The car's high beams cut through the blackness, scattering light onto the empty, desolate road. It was late into the night. The only sounds left in the world were the heavy hum of the engine, the cracking thunder overhead, and the violent fury of the deteriorating storm outside. Ryan glanced at him again, asking why he was panicking so much. He tried to reason that whatever had happened was over, and that there was absolutely no point in obsessing over those things anymore. He questioned why Ethan kept dragging himself back into the past, stating that they were just human and could do nothing against fate. Ryan was trying his best to comfort him, to ground him. He was, after all, deeply aware of the horror Ethan was carrying. This time, Ryan's voice actually penetrated Ethan's thoughts. Shifting slightly in his seat, Ethan finally spoke, his voice trembling as he told Ryan that everything that had happened back there was impossible to wipe from his mind. But before he could finish, Ryan interrupted him sharply, arguing that they had no choice but to forget. Ryan reminded him that they were miles away from that godforsaken place and safely back in their own city. He insisted that everything had happened too fast, but it wasn't their fault, and their only mistake was going to that house in the first place. But Ethan couldn't accept that. Staring blankly at the dashboard, he whispered that somewhere, deep down, they were responsible for all of it. He lamented that if they hadn't gone there, and if they hadn't done what they did, none of this would have happened, and none of them would be gone. Hearing this, Ryan yelled out in sheer frustration. right at that exact second, as Ryan's angry voice echoed inside the car, the clouds above collided with a ferocious roar. A massive bolt of lightning ripped across the entire sky, instantly bathing the entire dark landscape in a blinding silver glare. Even Ryan flinched, his body tensing up as the car swayed slightly, but he fought for control, gripping the steering wheel with everything he had, forcing the car back into alignment. He shot Ethan a sharp, angry glare before taking a deep breath to force himself to calm down. Dropping his voice into a harsh, serious whisper, Ryan told Ethan that he understood it wasn't easy to forget, but demanded that Ethan swear right then and there that they would never go back. He insisted that whatever they saw must remain a buried secret, warning that whoever tried to dig up that truth would only find death. He made it clear that he wasn't just making things up, because they both knew what had happened. He coldly stated that they only cared about their own survival now, and the rest of the world could go to hell. As the last words left Ryan's mouth, another crack of thunder boomed directly overhead. Ethan fell completely silent, his hands shaking in his lap. With a hollow voice, he softly replied that he wouldn't be able to forget, and deep down, he knew Ryan wouldn't either. But more than that, he warned Ryan that they couldn't stop that entity. It wouldn't forget them, it would never let them live in peace, and sooner or later, it would track them down and stand right in front of them again. Ryan snapped, yelling at Ethan to shut up as he tried to scream over his own rising inner terror. He shouted that enough was enough, and that he refused to believe in any of this supernatural, superstitious garbage. But right in the middle of Ryan's denial, Ethan suddenly shrieked at him to stop the car. In that very moment, right in front of the car's hood, a massive, blinding bolt of lightning struck the center of the asphalt with a deafening explosion. The flash was so intense that Ethan's vision went completely white. Panic exploded inside the cabin. Ryan lost his footing on the pedals, and the car lost all traction. In a desperate, blind reflex, Ethan grabbed the steering wheel and yanked it hard to the left. Ryan slammed his foot down, missing the brake and hitting the accelerator in the sheer chaos. The car spun violently out of control, its tires screeching in a high-pitched, agonizing wail against the wet tarmac as the vehicle whipped toward the right side of the highway. Ethan's heart leaped into his throat, the suffocating terror freezing the air in his lungs. Ryan screamed out in pure horror, but before either of them could even comprehend what was happening, the car veered off the road and slammed head-on into a massive, ancient oak tree standing at the edge of the woods. The sound of twisting metal and shattering headlights echoed through the storm as the hood crumpled upward, smoke instantly pouring from the engine. The brutal force of the impact threw both of them forward. Ethan's head whipped into the dashboard, a sharp white-hot pain exploding behind his eyes. Then, everything went quiet. The world faded to black, and they both collapsed into unconsciousness. The heavy, suffocating darkness slowly began to fracture, pulled away by a throbbing, white-hot agony. Ethan gasped, swallowing down the sharp taste of copper. His hand moved like lead, trembling violently as he pressed his palms against his forehead, trying to push back the blinding pressure behind his eyes. He made a desperate, agonizing attempt to sit up, but a vicious pang shot through his shoulder joint, forcing a muffled groan from his chest. When he pulled his hand away from his temple, his fingers were slick and dark with blood. His eyes snapped open, fighting the blurred haze, and his gaze immediately flew to the driver's seat. Ryan was slumped sideways, his upper body leaning heavily against the door, his head hanging limply out of the shattered window. Ethan choked out his friend's name, lunging across the console despite the tearing pain in his shoulder. He grabbed Ryan by his jacket, shaking him with frantic, terrified strength, begging him to wake up and look at him. He pressed his fingers against Ryan's neck. A pulse thudded beneath the skin, slow but steady. Relief washed through Ethan so sharply he felt dizzy, though fresh blood was also dripping down Ryan's pale forehead, soaking into his hair. Then, without warning, the skies opened up completely. The rain poured down in a furious, blinding sheet, slashing through the broken windows. Suddenly, a bizarre mechanical click echoed inside the ruined cabin. The remaining power windows began to roll up entirely on their own, sealing them inside the crumpled frame. Ethan froze, his breath hitching in his throat as a cold sweat broke out across his neck, overriding the warmth of his own blood. His phone, which had been thrown onto the floorboard, began to buzz, its screen flickering erratically. Ethan picked it up with a numb, trembling hand, his eyes wide as the car's mangled high beam suddenly flashed back to life without anyone touching the switch. The car shivered. The engine began to sputter and crank, turning over by itself, and the transmission shifted with a heavy, grinding clunk. The vehicle began to roll backward, reversing onto the empty highway smoothly, as if guided by an invisible, practiced hand. Ethan frantically slapped Ryan's cheeks, his voice rising to a panicked shriek as he demanded to know who was driving the car, screaming for Ryan to wake up. But Ryan remained completely unresponsive, his head lashing loosely with the motion of the vehicle. With a sudden jolt, the car stopped right in the center of the dark highway, the engine idling with a rhythmic, sinister hum. Ethan stared out of the side glass. The storm raged on, lightning striking the distant hills. But the road itself was completely devoid of life. It was a dead zone. Then, the automatic windshield wipers clicked on, moving across the glass with a slow, agonizing precision. Through the cleared glass, a strange, thick vapor began to roll across the asphalt. It wasn't just fog, it was a dense, unnatural smoke, heavy and white, pooling over the ground as if the clouds themselves had detached from the sky and crawled onto the earth. The atmosphere grew thick, suffocating, and terrifyingly still. Deep within the swirling vortex of white smoke, a shape began to form a silhouette. Ethan's eyes stretched so wide they strained in their sockets. His heart hammered so violently against his ribs he thought they would crack. The past, the horrific, buried nightmare he had spent the last 2 months sprinting away from, was standing directly in the high beams. It had tracked them down. There it was, wrapped in a tattered, pitch-black cloak that seemed to swallow the light around it. In its gnarled, pale hand, it held an ancient, heavy wooden staff, its tip capped with a rusted, jagged iron blade. The creature's skin was a grotesque tapestry of severe burns and sharp, protruding bone structures, completely unhuman, yet draped in that dark ceremonial robe. It tilted its head, fixing its blood-red eyes directly on Ethan through the windshield, staring into his soul with a gaze filled with absolute malice. Ethan knew, with terrifying certainty, that his time was up. He was going to die here. Completely unhinged, he began to shake Ryan's limp body with frantic, sobbing desperation, tears streaming down his face as he screamed into the enclosed cabin, begging Ryan to get up because she was right there and was going to kill them. Suddenly, Ryan's eyes snapped open. Ethan choked back a breath, freezing mid-motion. Ryan's eyes weren't blue anymore. They were wide, devoid of pupils, and glowing with the exact same stark, fluorescent, pink-white luminescence as the demon standing outside the car. With a violent shattering gasp, Ethan bolted upright in his bed. The echo of his own piercing scream rang in his ears. Outside his bedroom window, a heavy summer downpour was lashing against the glass, and the distant rumble of a real storm echoed through the dark night. Ethan sat frozen in the center of his mattress, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. His shirt was completely soaked through, his skin glistening with cold sweat despite the freezing air of the room. He pressed his palms against his face, his fingers sliding through the damp hair at his temples. There was no blood, no crumpled metal, no glowing eyes. He whispered to himself that it was just a dream, just a goddamn nightmare. He reached out with a trembling hand, grabbing a bottle of water from his nightstand. He unscrewed the cap and took a long, desperate gulp, letting the cold liquid soothe his parched throat. He closed his eyes, forcing his erratic heart rate to slow down, trying to shake the vivid image of that burned, demonic face from his mind. Suddenly, the piercing chime of his phone shattered the silence of the house. Ethan flinched violently, nearly dropping the water bottle. He stared at the glowing screen in the dark, wondering who could possibly be calling him at this hour of the night as a heavy blanket of dread settled over his chest. He slid out of bed, his bare feet touching the cold hardwood floor. He lived entirely alone in this large, echoing house, a property left to him after his parents had tragically passed away years ago. He had grown used to the silence, to the vast emptiness of the rooms. But tonight, for the first time in his life, the isolation felt dangerous. Every shadow in the hallway seemed to stretch toward him as he walked downstairs toward the landline phone in the kitchen. The flashes of lightning outside casting long, distorted shapes across the walls. He reached out and picked up the receiver, offering a quiet hello. A ragged, breathless voice crackled through the line. It was Ryan, asking if Ethan had been asleep. Ethan frowned, his grip tightening on the phone, pointing out that it was the middle of the night and asking what was wrong. Ryan stammered, admitting he had just woken up with a tight chest, confessing that he thought Ethan would be terrified too. Ethan's blood ran cold as he asked why he should be terrified. Ryan whispered that he had just had a horrific, lucid nightmare, sounding as though he might lose his mind if he said it out loud. As the storm outside clapped with a sudden deafening roar of thunder, a cold hand of dread gripped Ethan's heart. He didn't even have to ask, he knew. The absolute synchronization of their terror was a dark omen. Over the phone, Ryan began to describe the vivid details: the crashing lightning, the ancient oak tree, the bleeding foreheads, and the white smoke rolling over the highway. By the time Ryan finished speaking, Ethan felt as though all the air had been violently sucked out of his lungs. His knees felt weak. It wasn't an ordinary dream, and it certainly wasn't a coincidence. It was a lingering psychological grip, a supernatural tie that was pulling them right back to the horrific accident that had altered their lives 2 months ago. Ryan's voice lowered, sounding deeply unsettled as he insisted this wasn't an accident, but a sign that she was controlling their minds, forcing them to re-watch that night over and over again. He told Ethan they couldn't stay isolated and demanded they meet the next morning to figure a way out of the mess, swearing he wouldn't sleep a single wink that night. Ethan couldn't find the words to comfort his friend. He was completely paralyzed by his own rising terror. He muttered a quick agreement and hung up the phone, staring blankly at the wall. He knew exactly why this was happening. The dark truth was slowly unraveling before them, and it wasn't a random haunting, it was a definitive, inescapable summons. Ethan walked heavily back up the stairs, clicked on the bedtime lamp to banish the dark shadows, and lay down on his bed. Sleep was miles away now. As he stared up at the ceiling, his mind involuntarily drifted backward, slipping past the terror of the last 2 months, straight into the memories of how this entire tragedy had actually begun. He remembered how incredibly happy they used to be. Looking back now, it felt like a lifetime ago. Back then, their lives consisted of nothing but careless fun, college parties, and the easy arrogance of youth. Ethan had met Ryan during their freshman year at the university. Ryan was a popular guy, and through him, Ethan had inherited a whole circle of friends. But despite the crowd, the bond between Ethan and Ryan had grown incredibly deep. They were practically inseparable, spending hours driving around the city, talking about their futures, completely oblivious to the dark cloud waiting for them on the horizon. Who could have known that a malicious curse was waiting to latch onto their lives? Ethan often found himself wishing he had possessed the foresight to stop Ryan, to pull him back before he crossed the line. But it was too late now. The warning signs had knocked on their door the very day Ryan proudly introduced his new girlfriend. Samantha. Samantha was a striking, ethereal beauty, the kind of girl who possessed a dangerous, hypnotic charm. One look into her deep, piercing blue eyes, and she would take absolute possession of a person's thoughts. She was a mesmerizing force, someone for whom people would blindly do anything just to win a glance. Ryan had fallen hard and fast under her spell, completely swept away by her allure. On paper, they matched perfectly. Both came from wealthy backgrounds. Ethan, on the other hand, had never felt a sense of insecurity or awkwardness around Ryan, despite the massive class divide. Ethan came from a modest, hardworking middle-class family, while Ryan was the sole heir to a massive, multi-million-dollar real estate empire. It was likely Ryan's elite social status that had drawn Samantha to him in the first place. Yet despite knowing she belonged to his best friend, Ethan couldn't deny the strange, heavy gravitational pull Samantha exerted on him too. He tried his best to suppress it, treating her strictly as his best friend's girl, actively ignoring the subtle shifts in the air whenever she entered a room. But Samantha didn't ignore him. She had a habit of staring at Ethan intense, lingering glances that suggested a dark, secret agenda hidden behind her perfect smile. Ethan knew he couldn't bring it up to Ryan. Mentioning it would instantly destroy the deepest friendship he had. Ryan was fiercely protective and wouldn't tolerate a single negative word against her. So, Ethan had resigned himself to the circumstances, swallowing his discomfort and tagging along with the couple, maintaining his boundaries strictly out of loyalty to Ryan. Ethan thought to himself how he wished he had stopped him, wishing he had known what a curse this trip would bring upon them, transforming their lives into a living hell. His thoughts snapped back to the present for a second as a bright flash of lightning illuminated his bedroom, the thunder booming like a cannon, before his mind dragged him right back into the depths of that memory. The weather had been miserable that day, the sky an ominous, bruised gray. A heavy rumble of thunder rolled across the distant hills, and a howling wind whipped through the trees, creating an eerie, whistling chorus. Their SUV was cutting through the darkness of a desolate Sunsand State Highway, its high beams slicing through the thick fog as Ryan pushed the car forward. Ryan was in an incredibly good mood, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel to the music playing on the radio. Ethan, however, was staring silently out of the passenger window, feeling deeply unsettled. He hadn't wanted to come on this road trip in the first place. To make matters worse, they had taken a wrong turn somewhere hours ago, causing a massive 5-hour delay. They had been on the road since the previous day, and Ethan was running on zero sleep and an empty stomach. As the city lights faded far behind them, they passed through a couple of small, decayed rural towns. But as the miles wore on, the signs of human civilization vanished entirely, replaced by a dense, suffocating forest that lined both sides of the narrow road. The sun sank beneath the horizon, and a heavy, pitch-black night descended upon them. Ethan could feel his pulse accelerating, a strange, instinctual panic rising in his chest as the wilderness swallowed them whole. Ryan had practically begged Ethan to join them on this weekend getaway, promising an unforgettable experience at an old, historic estate that belonged to Samantha's family. Samantha had mentioned it was an old colonial-era mansion deep in Blackwood, Maine, a property that had belonged to her wealthy ancestors for generations. Neither Ryan nor Samantha knew much else about the history of the house, yet Samantha had been incredibly insistent on taking them there. Ethan couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something about her eagerness was profoundly wrong. Ryan glanced over at the back seat through the rearview mirror, offering a playful smile, asking his darling if she was sure this magical estate actually existed, or if they were just driving into the Twilight Zone. From the back seat, Samantha let out a soft, melodic laugh that sent a strange shiver down Ethan's spine, teasing Ryan about getting tired and assuring him they would definitely be there by midnight. Ethan's eyes flicked to the front mirror. Samantha was leaning forward, her striking blue eyes reflecting the dim dashboard light. She wasn't looking at Ryan. She was staring directly at Ethan's reflection with a slow, knowing smile. Ethan immediately averted his gaze, looking back out into the dark woods. Ryan chuckled, checking the clock and noting it was past 9, wondering if they would arrive in the dead of night. Samantha whispered for them to just wait until they arrived, promising they would see how incredible it was completely isolated, surrounded by deep valleys, and famously haunted. Ethan cleared his throat, trying to break the tension, asking if her ancestors hated people so much that they built an estate so far from society. Right at that moment, a violent crack of thunder echoed through the valleys. In the sudden flash of light, Samantha's expression shifted. She shot Ethan a sharp, piercing glare, her eyes narrowing as a cold, dangerously sharp smile cut across her face. She spoke softly, her voice dropping an octave, stating that her ancestors were powerful landowners who didn't care for the noise of ordinary people. She added coldly that she preferred the quiet too, and only liked to surround herself with special people. Ethan felt a sudden wave of nervousness wash over him under her intense gaze. He quickly looked down, gripping his seatbelt. Ryan, completely missing the dark undertone of the conversation, broke the silence with a loud laugh, joking that Ethan was just jealous and adding that a wild, out-of-the-way place was perfect to let loose and have a good time. Samantha's smile widened. Her eyes locked onto the back of Ethan's head as she agreed, telling them to just wait until they stepped inside. She promised this trip would be something they would remember for the rest of their lives, something they would never be able to forget, suggesting they might never even want to leave. Her words left Ethan feeling genuinely frightened. A cold weight of anxiety settled deep in his gut, an instinctual warning that everything about this situation was terribly wrong. The road conditions began to deteriorate rapidly as the SUV climbed higher into the dense black woods. Soon, the paved asphalt gave way to a rough gravel dirt road, causing the car to jolt and shake violently. The thick canopy of trees overhead blocked out what little moonlight was left, creating a tunnel of absolute darkness that only their high beams could penetrate. After another 30 minutes of navigating the treacherous terrain, the car came to a sudden halt. They had stopped in front of a massive rusted iron gate. It was heavily wrapped in thick industrial chains secured by a weathered padlock. Ethan peered through the windshield. Looming in the distance behind the gates, partially obscured by the shifting fogs,